Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Anara Tabashaliva, along with co-host Dr. Victor Fett, Dr. Katerina Shrey, and our program producer, Professor Larry Sherray. We host a weekly discussion panel on Russia's war on Ukraine with guests from Ukraine, military experts, medical personnel, academics, artists, literary figures, and relief workers. Our panel is recorded and circulated nationally and internationally. We appreciate your comments and feedback. Special thanks to Marshall University Libraries and MUIT for making this weekly event possible. If you are joining us live on Teams, please feel free to use the chat to post any questions for our guests. A quick greetings to our viewers in Ukraine from Professor Katerina Shrey.
Вітаємо наших слухачів в Україні з глибоким поклоном. Ми далі свідки вашого страшного терпіння і також вашої великої сили. Дякую вам за вашу участь в нашій тижневій програмі.
Thank you. Today's guest will be introduced by Professor Victor Fett.
Thank you, Anara. It is my great pleasure to introduce to our 114th weekly meeting my good friend and colleague, Dr. Slav Gratchev, from our own Marshall University at Huntington, West Virginia, United States. It is a sad day. It's 800 days of the war in Ukraine, and we're here every week discussing, reviewing, recording. Hopefully, some of this will be useful for the future. And what can be more useful than book publishing in times of war? I'm very glad that our great friend Oleg Fedorov is with us today. Oleg published Slav's book in Russian, a historical novel called 3 Steps to Freedom, TRI SHAGA K SVOBODE. And it is important that books in Russian discussing history of the last decades are published today in Kyiv in fighting Ukraine. I would introduce Slav in a moment, but I want to give first words to Oleg, who is with us from Kyiv. Oleg, please tell us, дайте нам пару слов об издательстве, о книге, об авторах.
Приветствую
Greetings, everyone.
Присутствующих. Как обычно, да, коротенькими фразами, чтобы вы перевели. Что я могу сказать? Я очень радуюсь. Я вижу вот сейчас развиртуализация так называемая со Славом у меня происходит, улыбается. Я очень рад, что эта книжка вышла.
I'm very glad to see Slav out of virtual reality. They meet, I guess, for the first time in person here. And Oleg is very glad that the book is published.
Да, все символично сейчас, и название книги, да, концовка ее, там, «Три шага к свободе», то, что делает сейчас Украина.
Everything is symbolic today. The ending of the book and its title, 3 Steps of Freedom, it's what's happening in Ukraine right now.
У меня постоянное такое чувство, что мы сейчас живем в мире, реальный мир жесток, но он полон вот таких метафор, аллюзий.
I have a feeling that while we are living in a very cruel, real world, it is full of those allusions and metaphors.
Пример тому, сегодня я у нас на сайте, там же, где и книга Слава Грачева, размещал книжку моего близкого друга, редактора нашего издательства Виктора Шендрика.
For example, today at the same website of our publishing house where Slav Gratchev's book is announced, today we posted a book of my friend, former author and editor of our publishing house, Виктор Шендрик.
Виктор – почетный гражданин города Бахмута.
Он is an honorary citizen of Bakhmut.
Уже покойный, он умер. И выкладывал я книгу, которую он которую мы издали в 2018 году, она называется, про Бахмут, она называется «Был городок».
Victor, who is not with us anymore, he is deceased. We put online we published his book. There was a town about Bakhmut. Book was written in 2018, before the war.
И вот когда выкладывал, я как-то не задумывался, а потом, увидев уже публикацию, изменил заголовок, потому что я отметил эту связь времен. Был городок. Это книга о Бахмуте.
After I published this book now, I noticed that it was called There Was a Town, and this is a book about Bakhmut, and I have changed the title. Какое сейчас заглавие?
Оно такое и есть. Был городок. Просто
There was a town. Yes, there was a town. That's the title.
История Бахмута. Я хочу просто сказать, что действительно время такое, что оно становится символичным прямо у нас на глазах, потому что события такой напряженности диктуют это.
We live in a time which is so potent and becomes charged with events just in front of our eyes.
Мы будем работать над тем, чтобы наши пророчества сбывались, чтобы мы сделали каждый свои 3 шага к свободе. Спасибо.
We will keep working to make our prophecies real, so each of us could make our 3 steps toward freedom. Thank you, Oleg. Thank you for being with us. It's a great honor to connect in this way, and I must say for myself, it has been great pleasure for over 2 years to communicate and participate in many projects of the publishing house. Drukarskii dvir Olega Fedorova, printing house of Oleg Fedorov, is the great publishing house in Kyiv, which currently publishes almost every day. You can see the website, and this is where our friend's book has been just published last week. Спасибо. Дякуємо. Спасибо, Oleg. We will let you go. We know you have to mail the books before post office is closed in Kyiv. Yes, once again, it was great couple of years, and I hope for more years of cooperation. We know you and we appreciate your work. Thank you. I now give microphone to my friend Slav Gratchev. We have been here at Marshall University working and communicating on many various issues. Slav is originally from Leningrad, from St. Petersburg, Russia, and he will tell us all about himself. He actually doesn't teach that language here. He teaches Spanish. Our university doesn't have any Slavic language programs. So I don't know if he counts his book as his research project or teaching project, but it's definitely a great community service. There are 3 items in our reports, always research, teaching, and community service. And I must say that our books that we publish in Slav edited a great number of interesting collective anthologies. Those books are definitely community service to worldwide community of scholars and readers. Welcome, Slav.
Thank you. Thank you. Before I start talking about my book, I also want to thank Oleg specifically and personally, because we have been communicating for quite a while. And for me, this is really an honor to have my book published in Kyiv, in your country. I have been in Ukraine many times in many instances, but I have never been to Kyiv. I was in Odessa, Nikolaev, Achakov. I was in Lvov. I have not been to Mariupol, but as you can see, I visited Ukraine frequently. Thank you, Oleg, very much. Thank you for everything what you have done for us and for me.
Thank you.
So now I would like to turn my attention to the book I will be sharing. I prepared a little slide show. So I will be sharing the screen now. And Victor will tell me that everything is working well. I'm a little confused.
Share screen arrow.
Yes,
on top right. Top right.
Browse my computer. No files. PowerPoint, leave. No.
If your PowerPoint is on, then you should be able to just click, and that will share to the rest of us.
It says Microsoft Whiteboard.
No. On Teams screen, on Microsoft Teams screen.
Microsoft Teams.
Yep.
Near the red leave button, there's an up arrow. Hit the share button, the green up or the blue up arrow.
Yes.
And then select your PowerPoint. Just click on it.
It's interesting. I don't see. It gives me some share content. What?
Share screen. You need share screen.
Okay.
Here we go.
Wonderful. Sorry for trouble. So little background of myself. As you can see, I got my Bachelor of Arts in Russian Language and Literature from St. Petersburg State University. So the city that I will be describing in my book is my own hometown. So I will be quite particular about the streets that I'm moving, where everything is taking place. So for that reason, I'm kind of misplacing things up. Bakhtin was living in Moscow, but I cannot really allow my protagonist to live in Moscow, which I don't really know. Then I moved to Canada, where I got my MBA degree from University of Victoria. Then I decided that I would like to continue with academic career. So I went to University of Alberta and have done my Masters of Arts in Spanish and Latin American literature, again in Canada, and then continued with a PhD from Purdue University. So as you can see, quite a bit of traveling and quite a bit of studies. How do I move to another?
Just click on PowerPoint. Yeah.
So first of all, I would like I would like to tell you some background. Just a second. So no. Okay. Little background. So this person played a very specific role in my life. When I was 16, I was walking by the bookstore. I stopped by and I bought a interesting book. It was a Problems of Dostoevsky Poetics from Mikhain Bakhtin. I was only 16 years old. I didn't know anything about this guy. I bought the book, brought it home, started to read, and just fell in love with it. He was mainly talking about Dostoevsky, of course. So Dostoevsky was one of my favorite writers, and Bakhtin this way kind of entered into my life, and I started to cherish. Unfortunately, I have forgotten to show you this book right away. It is here, maybe at the end. I will show you. It is still traveling with me from Russia to Canada, from Canada to the United States, from Massachusetts to Indiana, Indiana to West Virginia. So, and it is still lying on my table. One of my favorite books of Mikhail Bakhtin. amazing philosopher, amazing literary critic, and just a very interesting person to follow up with. Obviously, when I became an academic and I was thinking about some academic work, I was immediately attracted to Mikhain Bakhtin. So my dissertation was around Bakhtin. And these studies discovered that somewhere in Moscow were hidden and unpublished tapes. You probably remember still, they were on bobbins, on a big bobbins. So these tapes of live interviews with Mikhail Bakhtin for 12 hours. I was able to find the person, if you can see this Duvakin, Professor Duvakin, who used to be a professor in Moscow University. So his grandson is still alive, he's young. So he was able to give me these tapes. We were working diligently on these tapes for a number of years, and finally we published this book. 12 hours of conversations with Bakhtin, translated by my colleague Margarita, and edited by me and Margarita as well. So basically what I was doing, I was adding commentaries. So I have made 700 commentaries to this book, basically making a commentary about all significant persons or event or place where everything is taking place, to facilitate for American reader to understand what is going on. So basically, I dwelt into the deep ocean of knowledge that have been unknown to me, and I was horrified how many atrocities happened with Bakhtin himself, of course, and with so many people around him, and what was really going on in my country for a number of years, and it was basically unknown by many people. Then I would like to show you another book that we also did together with my colleague Margarita. So Russian Modernism and Memories of the Survivors, as you can see. This is one survivor, and this is another number of survivors. They also provided the same oral interviews. So, and we have done another book that was published in Toronto University Press. Both of these books had a great success. I was able to kind of trace down this success because they were coming to me as a reports of how many copies were sold. And one day I decided, why to keep it only for academics? Why to keep all this information only for academics? Because there's many of us, but the general public is much, much greater. They probably would like to know something more about the life of Bakhtin, which can be used in an exemplary. So, and I thought, why don't I just write a historical fiction? So this is the cover that I have designed. I don't want to say that I designed it myself. The idea was mine, and I asked my friend to design this cover for the book for me. So as you can see that this is the St. Petersburg or Leningrad, and those are two people standing at the river that is crossing the crossing the city. And these people should, of course, represent something, right? The couple, one person, another person, they probably somehow got together. They're looking at this city, and American flag stands for this freedom. So that everything will be clear, I've made a very short preface. So there's nothing made up in this story. I say this just outright. I was trying to be absolutely honest, and I was. Every single person is either a person that has been living, or I'm just using someone as a protagonist. So trying to be basically not exaggerating on anything. And each and every story that happens is basically the story that happened. I say that this book was written for about 40 years. Yes, for 40 years. I was thinking about something, but I have never touched the piece of paper. So all of a sudden, at the age of almost 60, I just sit down and started to write. So I estimated, I looked back and I thought that for 40 years I was thinking and thinking, collecting the information which I would like to bring into this book. So, and finally, this book became present. Of course, something should trigger the plot. So my plot is triggered by a professor from Marshall University, whose name is Stephen Ludlow, who works in the 80s. So see, I'm making a shift in time, which is basically almost like me, right? So I'm a professor at Marshall University, but 40 years later. So this professor of history, he travels to the conference where he meets interesting people. It's exactly how we always meet somebody when we go to the conference, and these people play a significant role in our future life. So Professor Stephen Ludlow, he travels to Chapel Hill, Carolina, and he meets Lev Lossev. Of course, because I don't want to be inaccurate about anything, I'm changing the name. So I'm just saying Losin instead of Losev. So people who know, they understand who it is. So this person, first of all, he's from St. Petersburg. He always has the same, deep memories about Leningrad that he left many, many years ago. He urges Stephen to go to Leningrad to discover the tapes that are preserved and conserved by some of his friends. So on a lunch that is shared between Stephen and Losin, there is Alexander Solzhenitsyn. I don't change his name. I just simply say that he was at the table eating with a great appetite. He's not saying anything, so that's why it is not necessary to change. And Joseph Brodsky. His name will be mentioned a few times, and I will tell you why. So again, this name is being mentioned. I don't change this because he's not an active person in the novel. In 1982, precisely at this time, and this is how Pulkovo Airport in Leningrad, that was Leningrad at that moment, so looked like. So just look at this airport. For 5 million city, we have one airport like this. And this is approximate number of planes that you can see. So there's not much traffic. There's not much traffic. It is not like in Washington, D.C. So Stephen Ludlow comes to the country that he has never been to, but he's Russian by origins because he was born by the Russian mother. And he speaks Russian fluently, of course. He's absolutely excited. He knows that he's coming for a mission. Where he goes to the Hotel Moskva. And again, this is the exact view how everything looked. As you can see, there's not much traffic around this big hotel. Why I chose this hotel? First of all, I was there many times. It was one of my favorite places. I mean, I was not there. It was only for international tourists. So Russian citizens at that time were not even allowed to walk in. So once they were coming, they were distributed to the most famous places. One of those, Hotel Moskva. So Stephen comes to this place. Where these tapes are hidden, I'm using the real person, Yuri Tsekhnowitzer, but because this person is becoming an active in he's an architect, he's a painter, I changed his name to Tsekhnover. So Yuri Tsekhnover, so he is holding those tapes that presumably Bakhtin left for 12 hours. So they're in his apartment. So Stephen travels to his place where Yuri Tsekhnowitzer lives in an English embankment. I will show you this. This is his real place. This is a wonderful, excellent, old style, huge apartment, condominium, where Yuri Tsekhnowitzer was living. Interesting detail. I was in his place. My mother was his friend because she was an engineer, he was an architect. So one day we were invited Yuri was a big fan of classical guitar, and I was playing classical guitar. So we were sitting at the table. I was playing the guitar. I was playing Russian romances, and all of a sudden Yuri looks at his wife and says, "Do you remember this chair? Few years ago, Joseph Brodsky was sitting exactly where Slav is sitting." Can you imagine this? So he's asking me, "Do you know who is Joseph Brodsky?" And of course I say, "I have no idea." So he immediately got some izdat, the books that were published by kind of not officially, and gave me to read some of the verses, the poems of Joseph Brodsky. This is how I was introduced to him. And it was 79. Then Yuri Tsefnover says that probably there's a need for the helper. He knows one wonderful girl who lives in Leningrad. She works with him in the library. So he introduces Irina to Steven. So let's just imagine that this is Steven and this is this wonderful lady. And of course, you can imagine that there will be probably the romance amongst them. So where is she working? So first of all, both of them, Yuri and the main protagonist, Irina, are working in a Saltykov library, which is called the Central Library in St. Petersburg. It has the biggest holdings, basically, in the whole city, and one of the biggest holdings of the books in the country. I can tell you it's about 40 million volumes. 40 million volumes. So one of the biggest libraries in the world. So Steven has to have a legal reason to be in Russia. So he is a professor of history. Mainly, he's working on his book on Russian ballet. So now he needs to come to this library where he's kind of legally sitting and legally doing stuff. And yes, of course, he's being spied by KGB, what he's doing and where he goes, but he has an official reason. So the romance starts on the Nevsky Prospect. This is kind of a Leningrad's Broadway, where everything is, and all the stores and the beautiful sceneries and the beautiful architect. So this little couple meet in Nevsky and follow because they know that Steven might be under observance by KGB. So they try to get into the crowd and then disappear somewhere so that they can sit and quietly talk about their business. And now you probably recognize what I was using for my cover for the book, Peter and Paul Fortress, the first building that was built by Peter the Great in St. Petersburg 300 years ago. So when people think about Leningrad or St. Petersburg, you cannot not to mention or not to think about Peter and Paul Fortress. So practically, I don't want to tell you the whole plot, but you can imagine. So they come to Yuri Tsefnover apartment. They borrow these tapes. They work together. They cannot work, and this is true. They cannot work together in a Moscow hotel. So Irina, because there's there's always surveillance. So Irina offers Steven to come to her apartment where they can quietly start working on these tapes. And basically, when I was describing all this work, I was thinking about me and my wife, whose name is also Irina. We have been working, you remember I said about 700 commentaries that I have written for the book. So we spent hours and hours and hours of research so that I would be able to write those commentaries. This is how we have been working together. Steven and Irina are working together, transcribing those 12 hours of conversations so that they can smuggle this kind of manuscript. It is not the book yet, right? Just a manuscript translation. So out of the country, so that will be eventually published, like I published this book. and 3 steps to freedom. This is the main motive of the book. The mother of Stephen, you remember that he's a professor of Marshall University, and his mother was Russian. She was liberated by Americans in 1945. And when Americans liberated those prisoners, they said, who wants to go to America? Please make 3 steps forward. It's a real story from grandmother of my wife. Her grandmother was taken by Germans into the imprisonment. She was liberated by Americans. It was exactly the same thing. She was offered, like everybody else, to make 3 steps forward, but as you can imagine, she didn't make those steps forward. She returned back to the Soviet Union, and then she was basically sentenced to 10 years to serve in labor camps for returning, for being a good citizen of the country. Thanks God, Stalin passed away, and actually she was not arrested, but the documentation was already prepared. And then Irina comes, they get married, of course, in Russia, in Soviet Union. They have difficulties to get married. They have difficulties to get out of the country. And finally, so you can just probably read the small plane, just with 2 propellers, exactly like you probably have seen it many times, landed in Huntington Airport. I make a little description of things that you know, but other people outside of Virginia, West Virginia, they don't. And then, of course, she sees her husband, and she just runs to him and makes 3 steps forward, which is, as I say, kind of symbolic. And I would like to thank Larry, first of all, because he was the first one to publish my book on the university libraries. So he had to do a lot of work. I was asking him to change this and change that because I was not very experienced. Then I changed the title. And again, I had to ask Larry to change the title. He was very kind, helping to do everything properly. And as you can see, there's right now, for 1 year only, we published it only last year, April 27th. We have 2,560 downloads. Actually, today we have 2,485 downloads already. So every single day, approximately 4, 5, or 6 downloads happen every single day. So this is the end of my presentation, and I will be happy to answer all your questions. So stop sharing, and I'm coming back.
Great, thanks, Slav. And I will make just a couple of observations to orient people a little bit more, and then we will ask for comments, and definitely, I'm sure there are questions. First of all, Slav works here at our university less than myself. I boast that I will be next year 30 years, and you came to Marshall at 2011. 11. So it's still quite a big time. I never researched, as I listened to your talk, it came to my mind that I don't know if, maybe our colleagues will correct me, if Marshall ever was portrayed in any novel, in any language. And it would be quite an interesting story if the first actually work of fiction in which Marshall is participating and is a background would be written in Russian. But I remembered one trivia fact, which I always ask my students. No one knows this because I'm the only one who reads books these days. There is a great book by John Grisham, Pelican Brief. There is, of course, movie with Julia Roberts. But movie lacks an episode from the book where a main character is running from mafia, Darcy Shaw. She tries to cover her tracks, and the only place where she tries to hide so no one will find her in the United States, is Huntington Airport. She flies in and rents the car and never stays in West Virginia. So in this way, just my whimsical comment that we always try to put on the map, as they say, we put Marshall on the map by what we are doing and our publications. But I don't think anyone ever made it a place of a character from the fiction book, at least. I don't know about that, but Katerina may correct me. Please, Katerina.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. And I think that is absolutely fantastic. But I see that Dean Deutsch has a hand up. So I'm going to, maybe he has an answer for this.
Yes.
Well, I was just going to say the movie We Are Marshall is a semi-documentary, but semi-fiction too. So, but what I wanted to ask Slav was, is this book available both in Russian and in English?
Yes. So first of all, I would like to add a couple things. You remember I was talking about the book of Bakhtin that I purchased when I was 16 years old. This is the one, Problems of Dostoevsky Poetics. So the book that travels with me. Another thing I want to say, this book was the first part of trilogy. So when I started to work on this, I immediately recognized that it's going to be only the first book of the trilogy that will continue. So, and Stephen, Professor of Marshall, and Irina will come back again in the third novel. So, because I have the whole plot and the whole story, what is going to happen to them together. So, Len, once again, your question.
My question was the languages in which your novel is available, 3 Steps to Freedom.
Yes. So I tried to write it in English first. I failed. I realized that I cannot do it. So I switched writing in Russian. So I wrote everything in Russian, and then I asked my colleague to translate it. So she translated the entire book, translated this beautifully. Yes, it is available, and right now I'm trying to find a good literary agent to publish it in the United States.
Okay, thank you.
Any more comments and questions, please? Larry has one. Please, Larry.
So the Dvakin tapes, where in these tapes that you're transcribing, where were they actually located? And where did you actually go to find them?
Okay, actually, these tapes were located in a basement of Moscow University Library. Yes, I specifically went to Moscow to see these tapes. I met with the owner, let's say, the owner of these tapes. So Professor Dvakin donated these tapes to the university, but university was not interested. They just assigned the corner somewhere in the basement, and they covered it with a piece of cloth, and it was there for many years under the dust. But KGB came and put a sticker, forbidden to use, to look, to listen, to watch, under the penalty. And of course, nobody wanted to bother with this. Only in the late 90s, somewhere like in 93 or something, they removed that sticker and it became kind of legal, available without punishment. So I came a little later, about 10 years later. So I listened to this, and then I said, well, this is what we have to do. We were transcribing them with together with Margarita and published.
I have one other question. That's part of your scholarship. But what caused you, what was the catalyst that made you want to write a historical fiction?
The catalyst was this. When I saw the records of how the book is being sold, the academic book. I thought, wow, it's not too bad for the academic book to be sold in such numbers, in such quantities. But if it is, if this book can become a historical fiction, it can be wide open for the general public. So it can sell in hundreds of thousands of copies, and much more people will know. So basically, like in my story, I'm retelling those tapes. But of course, because I changed the name, it is not Bakhtin. There's some figure, Bakhov, who speaks, right? And he's telling the story of his life that is representative for any scholar or scientist in Russia of those times. Of course, he meets people exactly as Bakhtin did. He was a friend with Mark Chagall. He was a friend with Kazimir Malevich. I mentioned those people. I put him into the contact for a short little while, like in reality, but still it is kind of Bakhtin, but Bakhov in my book.
Did the Russia's attack on Crimea in 2014 and then again in 22 have any impact on your desire to write?
Actually, it had even more desire. I have more desire to write right now because we have only one weapon in our hands. It's how we can, it's la pluma, right? So the pen. So we have to write. We have to bring the truth to those people who don't know this truth. And I already had an agreement to publish this book in Moscow previously, before it was actually published here. But all of a sudden they sent me emails saying, unfortunately, the situation does not allow this to happen. So you can see that the oppression already started. So that's why, for me, it was really just a stepping stone, wonderful and honorable thing to publish it in Kyiv, in a democratic space, because right now we have an authoritarian space in Russia again.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Slav. Katerina, please.
I have a comment and a question, and actually several questions. I love historical fiction, and I think this is such a smart idea. As you say, you're going to reach a much wider audience. I have learned so much. I'm a medievalist by training, and so of course I've studied the history of that period. But it wasn't until I picked up a historical novel from that period that I really felt immersed in what was happening. And so I think that is just I love this idea, and I think it's just a brilliant move to bring knowledge to a non-academic audience in an accessible and appealing format. I think that is great. So I have several questions. The first one is, it has to do with being published in Kyiv. I remember reading somewhere that you, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is you're not taking royalties for this, and that you are encouraging people to purchase this book, not just to purchase the book for itself, but to support the Kyiv publishing house. Is that right? And if so, that is incredibly generous, but speak a little bit about that.
Slav, you're frozen on our screen, or on my screen at least you are. There you are.
As well.
Okay.
Mine as well. On mine as well. So I'm just going to, while we try to get Slav back, what I just want to reiterate what my understanding is, that that to help the publishing house stay in business, and we put the link in the chat, that Slav is generously, I think, not accepting royalties. Is that right? Is that correct? Do I have that correct?
Katrina, there was an interruption of a communication. I was not able to hear anything for a while. Can you please repeat?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So my first thing was a comment just praising the idea of historical fiction. I think that's just brilliant. But also, I remember reading someplace recently that you have chosen not to accept royalties for this because you're trying to support the publishing house in Kyiv. Is that right? Oh, we may have frozen up. Were we able to hear that?
I'm not sure what happens, but yes,
I'm afraid that I'm afraid that this is on my side because I just saw the internet jumping.
Okay, but I think if you can hear me now, just keep moving a little bit so that when I see you stop moving, I'll stop talking. So I read somewhere where you're not accepting royalties for this because you want to support the publishing house in Kyiv. Is this true? This is incredibly generous if it is.
Oh, thank you. Yes, that was my immediate offer to Oleg. I said that there's absolutely no way and there's no desire. I don't want to collect any royalties for this. So I just want Ukraine to prosper.
Wow, that's
and this publisher to continue business because it is so important for us.
That's amazing. That's truly generous. I loved hearing the summary. I can't wait to read the book. I'm very excited for this. I'm wondering if your book were to be picked up and adapted into a film, who do you have any ideas of who you would like to play the main character and the wife? And any ideas for casting?
Это у нас, я думаю.
Did it also skip? Should I repeat? Oh, you're back. You're back. We can see you now. So, so
you were asking about English version, correct?
Well, no, if it were to be adapted into a film, because it sounds like the kind of story that would, and historical fiction is a very popular topic for films, Hollywood films. So if this were to be adapted into a film, do you have any ideas for casting? Who would play the main characters? And like Victor, I love the fact that this is set in Huntington, West Virginia and Marshall University. I think that is great. I think stories like this, at the very least, the locals will be interested to see how familiar places in this town are portrayed. So yes, I'm wondering if this were to be made into a film, if you were to be approached by Hollywood to make this into a film, like who would be your casting choices?
I think probably Steven Spielberg might be interested.
Okay, it's a good choice for a director.
So for the director, yes, because he loves history. His film Lincoln is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And he likes dark history. I mean, very dangerous history. So this is the story about a very dark history in the Soviet Union. So, but of course, this is just kind of hypothetical.
You never know. You never know. But again, just thank you. Thank you so much for publishing. Well, I love the relationship you're building with the Oleg Fedorov's press. This is wonderful. Thank you. I also think the title is great. 3 Steps to Freedom. In that title itself, you're already educating so many people. My parents are also are immigrants as well. And that is not a story that we have in our family, but how powerful is that? Your grandmother, 3 Steps to Freedom. And of course, the beautiful ending, well, maybe it's not the ending, but when they reunite at the airport. Great title that in itself communicates so much. So congratulations to you. This is no small feat, and I'm just very, very excited and looking forward to reading it.
Thank you very much, Katerina. Thank you. Thank you.
Any more questions, please? Any more questions or comments from the viewers? While we're waiting, I want to ask another question, which may be not obvious to those watching this in recording. You placed, Duvakin's tapes are not limited to Bakhtin, we know, and you edited other books based on those body of work. And I want you to say a couple of words about the volume. Duvakin was exceptional person. In 1960s, with very, very backward technology, he realized he must record living voices of those who are still alive. But just a little bit why it became possible, because people in this country would not realize that 60s was time of relative freedom, where people of those generations would not be afraid to speak out on record. That was important. So we went away from this time now.
I did not know that. That's actually really interesting. It's a really good point.
Because my grandfather, who was in his 60s at this time, never talked to me about the past. Very few people dared to record their memories. And this was exactly the time, mid-60s, late 60s, when he did this. Can you comment on this, please?
Right. I don't want to, probably I don't want to comment on top of Victor's, but this is true. So that was the moment when people were able to say something. But as I listened to Bakhtin's story on these tapes, I knew, I could feel it, that he was reluctant to say something that he would have said if he knew that there will be no consequences. So he was still very cautious, even though he was already 78 years old. It was a relatively free time, but still he was cautious. So that's why in my book, I'm kind of adding something that I believe he would have added if he could.
Well, forgive this naive question. Was there anything on the tapes that truly surprised you? Were you able to, was a lot of it what you would expect him to have said? Was there any, and you don't have to say what it is, like keep it a surprise for us in the book, but was there anything on the tapes that really surprised you?
Yes. How people really suffered for nothing.
Yeah.
His sentence for 10 years in Gulag, in labor camps, was for giving lectures about Kant and Hegel.
Gosh, wow.
Can you imagine this?
No, that's, yeah, wow.
So people were coming to his private apartment because he was rejected from any other universities. And he was just giving or sharing his views and knowledge with people about Kant and Hegel, because he was a philosopher.
Mm-hmm.
That was his special.
Yeah.
So that was main accusation. 10 years in labor camps for doing this. It was then replaced. His wife wrote a letter to the Minister of Culture, and they changed these to 5 years in exile. Light punishment.
Wow. Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
This was the fate of many. And remind us, please, what year it was when he was arrested. And
sorry, Victor?
What year was it when he was arrested, the real Bakhtin?
1929. That was
29.
Still about 10 years to the Great Terror. It was not a Great Terror. It was just normal life. 29.
So it went gradually, and he was lucky to survive, of course. Also, another thing which viewers may not be familiar with, you actually, we all discovered Dovakhin's tapes already in the time of relative freedom, in our times, in 2000s, right, in 1990s. But you take the action back to the 80s, which means a lot. It means that Irina and Stephen in your novel are doing things illegally, that they're doing it clandestinely. What they're doing were discovered by the authorities, then at least Stephen would be, would be put out of the Soviet Union. He wouldn't be allowed to stay. And definitely his pretext of doing a book on ballet was just a pretext. He wasn't really writing this type of book. So I find it interesting how in fictionalization of real events, one, as you did, one can move the facts and even artifacts like those tapes and books, you can move them in time and they make different sense, even plus minus 10 years, just like you said, 29 for you and me is very surprising time for arrests compared to 37. We are used to think about 1937 Great Purge, but only because thousands and thousands were arrested at this time who survived and left memoirs. So again, it's just a general observation on complexity of what you are doing and fictionalizing. It's you put your characters and what they do into a very precise time context, I must say. And I already have read the unpublished second part of your trilogy in Russian, and here is my next question, which may be interesting for everyone. In second book of the trilogy, you tell more about so-called Spanish kids, because you're teaching Spanish culture and Spanish language, which is much more known around here than Russian. But I doubt that many people know the story of those Spanish children taken into Soviet Union. So could you just do a little preview by telling us a couple of words about this, please?
Yes. So you remember I said there's a first book, but there's a trilogy, and the second novel has been already completed. It doesn't have a title yet, unfortunately. It's difficult to give it a proper title. But it's about the children from Spain that during the Civil War in 36-39 in Spain were welcomed to the Soviet Union. 2,995 children came to the Soviet Union. 90% of them never returned. Not because they didn't want to, but because they were held up back in the Soviet Union. That untruthful information was given back to their parents, untruthful information through official ways, through the consulate, that their children have died from typhus or from whatever, and children received the information that their parents have been deceased. They thought that they don't have anybody to return to. Those parents in Spain were not able to expect anybody because their children passed away. My first professor of Spanish was one of these children. That story goes back to the 1983. She was already old lady, fairly old, in about 60s. And I didn't know that I will be interested to write the story about this. So this is the second novel is about, but there are some common things to common protagonists that come into the interaction.
Thank you, Slav. Any more questions, please?
But it's amazing how it is amazing how historical fiction allows for you to interweave like stories you've heard directly from people to merge that with your research. This is just so, and really it's a tribute also to your family's experience, quoting your wife's grandmother, the 3 steps thing. From what I understand, you are a very active, and in fact, I know you're a very active scholar. Was this your first foray into writing fiction? And what was the translation like? Because you say you've been thinking about this story for 40 years. Was it hard to transition from being an acclaimed scholarly writer to now foraying into fiction? Was it like, what was the hard part? Dialogue, characters, plot? As speaking as a non-fiction writer.
You know, academic writing taught me a lot. I became very precise. My language has grown, although I'm writing in Russian, but still, kind of the dominance of the language still is important. And I think that no one will be able to criticize my fiction books for kind of distorting the history, because I'm trying to check everything like any academician would. So I try to check every single fact before I put it into the book. So that's why I'm very grateful to my academic experience that I'm writing, let's say, decently in fiction.
Nice. Very nice. I see Larry's got a hand up.
Yeah, I'm wondering how many characters in the book came out of your transcribing what Bakhtin had discussed with, in the book and the interviews. I mean, Bakhtin, no doubt, didn't just talk about himself. He must have talked about other intellectuals, other scholars. And were there other characters besides Bakhtin whose experiences you've put into your book?
Again, I'm having difficulty with hearing.
Did you use the book about the interview Dvorkin had with Bakhtin? Did he talk about other characters in history that were important that you put into your novel?
I think we have communication delays.
Yeah, you're
Something
frozen
with
again, Slav.
Wave bandwidth. Yeah. Did you hear the question, Slav? No.
It's okay. We're having some technological issues. We're not hearing you now, Slav.
Do you hear us? I think we have a communication problem here, but we're nearing the end of our discussion at any rate, and let's see if Slav is able to come back. Meanwhile, I should definitely mention the great editor and translator who helps Slav and others to render these Russian texts in English is Margarita Marinova from Virginia. Absolutely a great translator and professor, which her skills are even more surprising because she is not actually Russian by birth, she's Bulgarian, but she knows her Russian quite well. I'm not sure what is going on. It looks like I'm out of communication right now.
I can see you, but that's pretty much it.
Do you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Slav is not with us, and we probably will have to finish here. We have been here for an hour, and everything was said.
Yeah.
And we just commend Slav for his work. It is great. Let's see if he is able to come back and wait for a moment. This was really very interesting effort. I haven't seen much fictionalization of real life characters, I guess, since Tolstoy or whatever, because in Soviet time it wasn't one of the genres which flourished. So of course we base a lot on biographies, but again all this has been done with reservation. Many biographies which were written in Khrushchev's or Stalin's or even my time and Brezhnev's time in Soviet Union necessarily omitted the entire pieces of biography. It was not unusual to see someone's biography published where even his death date would be just given in 1930s without any comments. It meant for us that person died in the camps or was shot, but the publisher was not allowed to comment on this. Not once it was said in a preface or comments that that the author spent last years of his life somewhere in Siberia or provinces, but without explanation. How did he get there? Bakhtin himself was exiled to a small Volga city of Saransk, which is actually the region is called Mordovia, and it's one of those. I was talking about Bakhtin and his exile in Saransk, one of the areas of camps. Slav, you're muted right now. Unmute yourself, please. We have you back. We wanted to wait. Yeah. We wanted to wait, and meanwhile, I was just commenting on Bakhtin and the history. But thank you for your time and for presentation. I would say it's very unique opportunity to interview you, especially on this podcast, because while your book has no direct relationship to Ukraine right now, of course it does, because what we are observing now is, by our own eyes in front of us, is the next installment of the same history. It's next generation of people, many generations. It's basically children and grandchildren of your characters on both sides of the war. And history continues, and very rapidly it will take generations. I can't imagine literature about current war. Already some novels started appearing already. People write them as it goes, which was unheard in previous wars. Please tell us a few more words and we will conclude this session.
Few more words. It actually has some relation to Ukraine, because that lady, her name is Susanna, her real name, my first professor of Spanish, the child of Spain. She arrived to Kyiv from Basque Country and from Asturias, province of Asturias. They were arriving to Kyiv and Odessa. Mainly this is where they were stationed. Of course, they could not arrive directly to Kyiv by the sea. They were arriving to Odessa, then taken by the bus to the Kyiv, where they were put in the orphanages. Although, when the Soviet government was making a deal inviting those children, they were saying they will place them into families, but they didn't do it. They put them in orphanages for whatever reasons. So that lady, she happened to tell me that story when she arrived in 37 to Kyiv. She was in an orphanage, and then she was adopted by some nice people. And then they were running away from the German surrounding of Kyiv. So she basically survived by chance, and then eventually ended up in Leningrad. So I'm using that story. Of course, I'm just kind of putting this in the different settings, but it has a direct connection to Ukraine.
Thank you. It's marvelous to see how history is intertwined and how something we think about has direct relationship. I never thought that, of course, I knew name of Bakhtin since I was a student back in Soviet Union, but I never imagined that it could be put in a dramatic, fictionalized novel in this way. And this or that way, it will be known to people. And memory is a strange thing. It will survive only if we keep remembering and writing. Even about things which happened before us.
Leslie Titus, one of our regular listeners, has his hands up.
Please, Leslie, I have a question.
Hello. I mostly just want to say hello again to you, Slav. and say that I'm glad that your book is being published. Obviously, it's not being published in a way that I can read as of yet, but when it does get published in English, I'll be happy to read the rest of it. Obviously, I've read a few short excerpts, including in one of your classes.
Thank you, Leslie. You know, the major thing, the most important thing, that this book is already translated into English. So to publish it, it is just a matter of time. It will be published one way or the other, today or tomorrow, but it will be. But when there's no product, you cannot do anything with nothing. But the product is here. And I'm glad, because the translation was very difficult. I tried to do it myself and I couldn't. And I had to ask my colleague to do it, and she did it beautifully, absolutely beautifully. Victor read English version, right? So he can confirm.
Very good. Thank you, Leslie. Well, it was again a pleasure to introduce Slav and his fictional novel, historical fiction, I must say, 3 Steps of Freedom. And again, we're glad that you introduced it here. I think it may be the first formal presentation of the book. And moreover, we are so glad it will be published in Kyiv, and surely people will read it. Oleg Fedorov's publishing house is probably, I should say, the most important publisher right now in Ukraine for free Russian authors, for those outside Russia who want to make themselves listened, heard. Thank you very much, Slav, and I will ask Dr. Shrey to give our greeting to our viewers in Ukraine. We have at least one here.
Дорогі браття і сестри в Україні, ми зберігаємо вас у наших щоденних думках і молитвах. Нехай милосердний Бог тримає вас у своїй опіці. До наступного тижня. Прощаємося.
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Slava.
Good, slow.